Is it true that an emperor once turned Rome into a stage of desire and blood? Is it true that inside his palace beasts lasted until dawn, painted the sky red, with wine flowing like rivers, with pleasures that crossed every boundary? Or are those only tales, woven and magnified through 2,000 years of retelling? Tonight, let us listen and search for an answer. History for Sleep will guide you gently into that darkness with a soft rhythm, turning history into a dream. If you are drawn to misty legends, to layers of time brushed away with quiet care, please press like, subscribe, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. For every step you take with us is the light that keeps History for Sleep alive, retelling stories of the past in a voice that soothes, calm, and deep. The Palatine Hill rises in the mind, shadows falling thick over marble walls. This was the heart of ancient Rome, where emperors once lived and died, leaving echoes for all who came after. Long corridors stretch on, oil lamps flickering, giant columns casting shadows on the stone floor. That splendid palace now holds only the faint sound of footsteps, as if the past still whispers through every crack in the stone, and within that scene, a name is spoken, Caligula. A name bound to corruption, excess, and madness. Yet when we listen closely, that name sighs like a ghost, both real and unreal. The Romans once loved him. When he first took the throne, Caligula was seen as light after the dark years under Tiberius. He was young, radiant, praised as a living god. But soon that image twisted. Accounts from historians became soaked in blood and desire, cruel games, forbidden loves, beasts overflowing with lust. Did it all truly happen? Or did ancient pens choose to paint him in darkness, to condemn a fallen emperor? Let the scene lead the way. You walk along the marble corridor. On both sides, statues of gods stand motionless, torchlight casting shadows across their cold faces. In the distance, the sound of a lyre drifts faintly, not gentle, but flickering, broken, like a sorrowful song. The air feels both grand and suffocating, as if everything is waiting for something about to unfold. Rumors of Caligula spread in taverns, where people gathered after long days. They said he threw coins into the streets like the wind, only to raise taxes the very next morning. They said he loved animals, loved his own sisters, loved power more than the gods themselves. They said he laughed as he watched blood flow in the arena and wept when an actor died upon the stage. Truth and illusion interwove, legend and reality blurred. And we, after thousands of years, can only hear the whispers. That night, Rome's sky glittered with stars. The Tiber flowed silently, reflecting the moonlight. Yet inside the Palatine Palace, oil lamps still burned, casting light over banquet tables left uncleared. Silver cups still carried the scent of wine. Garlands drooped over the tables, and incense lingered faintly in the air. A half-finished grandeur, like a painting left incomplete, leaving shadows that stirred unease. And from that shadow began the tale of Caligula. We shall not rush to judgment. We will move slowly, like a traveler in an ancient corridor, placing a hand upon the cold stone, listening to the breath of the past. From a childhood lived in fear to a throne bathed in glory, then falling into a storm of desire and blood. For Caligula was not just a name to shudder at. He was also a mirror, reflecting a Rome at its height, yet already rotting within. And in the whispers of the Palatine night, perhaps we will glimpse the very shape of humanity, with its weakness, its hunger, its shadows of the soul. So then, close your eyes and let the voice carry you deeper to see the boy Caligula in his youth, growing up in a golden cage, surrounded by fear and watching eyes, to understand why a young emperor, once praised as divine, would become a symbol of madness. And then another chapter will begin. Let imagination take us back through time. Before the name Caligula became the emblem of extravagance and madness, there was once a little boy, trembling in the shadows of Rome's imperial court. He was born with the full name Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, but few ever called him that. People preferred the affectionate name given by soldiers, Caligula, meaning little boots, for he often wore a miniature uniform and tiny soldier's boots when he followed his father into the field. In the beginning, Caligula was not imagined as a fearful ghost, but as a beloved child, cherished by the entire camp. His laughter mingled with the sound of war drums, like morning light breaking through the smoke of battle, but fate never allows peace for long. His father, Germanicus, the heroic general, adored by the people, died when Caligula was only 7. That sudden death planted seeds of doubt and fear in the boy's heart. Whispers spread that Emperor Tiberius himself had arranged it, fearing Germanicus might win more devotion than him. Those whispers crept into the ears of a child, shadows falling over his earliest memories. After his father's death, Caligula and his family were caught in the whirlpool of palace life. The vast palace, which should have been a place of shelter, became a golden cage. Inside that cage, every step, every glance could carry danger. Emperor Tiberius, who held the throne then, was known for suspicion and cruelty. He brought Caligula's family to live on the island of Capri, a place of white walls, but never of peace. Capri was like a twisted stage, a place of wealth, but also of pleasures and darkness. Imagine the young Caligula, only 12 or 13, passing each day through Tiberius's strange feasts, where wine poured like waterfalls, where entertainments defied imagination. He learned that power had no limits, and that fear was what kept order in the world. Slowly he learned to be silent. In those years on Capri, Caligula became a quiet child, his eyes always wide, as if to swallow every detail around him. People said he missed nothing, but no one knew what he was truly thinking. In that silence, there was worry, cold observation, and perhaps a hidden anger waiting to rise. At night, he sometimes lay listening to waves crash against the cliffs of Capri. Outside, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly beneath the moon. But inside the marble room, the boy's heart beat quickly with fear. His relatives were exiled, executed, or disappeared from court life like candles snuffed out. In that vast emptiness, he learned his first hard lesson. In this world, family could not stand against power, and yet, in many memories, Caligula still appeared, endearing. People recalled a boy in tiny armor, riding a pony, smiling innocently. But when that gentle light collided with the shadows of Capri, it changed into something else, a strange blend of innocence and hardness. Tiberius, suspicious as he was, still saw something in this boy. Perhaps the spark of royal blood, perhaps the shadow of Germanicus, whom the people still mourned. So Tiberius kept Caligula by his side, and while others fell, Caligula survived. Survived by pretending to be obedient, by seeming harmless, while inside, fear and ambition crystallized into something unpredictable. Imagine how a child would grow, seeing every day nothing but pleasures, plots, and spilled blood. A childhood that should have been filled with songs and play was instead crowded with daggers behind curtains and suspicious eyes, watching every step. In his sleep, Caligula heard the sound of the sea, but also the shrill laughter of Tiberius, the cries of those who had fallen from power. These sounds blended together, becoming a dreadful lullaby for his childhood dreams. And when dawn came, he still had to wear an innocent smile, hiding everything inside. Those years trapped Caligula in an invisible cage, a cage gilded in gold, yet suffocating, a cage of power, but also of fear. And when the door of that cage opened, the young bird would take flight, but it carried with it the darkness of where it had grown. And then, one day, that boy would ascend the Roman throne amid the cheers of the masses. They saw in him the image of Germanicus's son, the light they had long awaited. But few knew, behind that light were eyes that had grown up in darkness, that had witnessed things no child ever should. The story of Caligula, then, is not only the tale of a tyrant, it is also the story of a stolen childhood, leaving scars for a lifetime. Let the mists of time retreat one step further. From the trembling boy in Capri's shadows, Caligula now stepped into the light of Rome. The Roman throne, the trumpets, the laurel crown, all were waiting. When Emperor Tiberius died in the year 37 AD, all of Rome seemed to sigh with relief. His final years, consumed by suspicion and blood, had turned the empire into a suffocating place. The people longed for a new face, a new reign, a hope for brightness. And so Caligula, only 24 years old, was chosen, not only because he was Tiberius's heir, but more importantly, because he was the son of Germanicus, the legendary general, whom the people still mourned with love. The name Germanicus was like a gentle song in the collective memory, and now Caligula was seen as the one who inherited that light. Imagine the day of coronation, Rome dressed in its brightest garments. Flags fluttered on rooftops, garlands hung at the temple gates, Incense and wine filled the air. The great forum overflowed with shouts of joy. Crowds pressed close, eager to see the face of the young emperor. Caligula appeared, draped in the purple robe of royalty, the laurel crown gleaming under the sun. He smiled, a radiant smile that set the crowd ablaze in cheers. People wept, people scattered rose petals, people believed a new era, gentler and brighter, had begun. To the people, Caligula was comfort. After the shadow of Tiberius, they saw in him the image of his father Germanicus reborn. They called him the Star of Hope. And in that moment, Rome seemed to believe that sorrowful memories could be erased by new light. The first months of Caligula's reign were truly bright. He granted amnesty to many exiled by Tiberius. He opened the treasury to give money to the people, and he organized games to celebrate the new dynasty. Rome was alive, as if in a festival without end. People whispered, "We have a just and merciful ruler." Caligula also held lavish spectacles, opening them even for common citizens to attend. He wanted Rome to see this emperor was not hidden away in a palace, but shared joy with his people. Some said he walked among the crowd, smiling, even touching the hands of ordinary men and women, a closeness rarely seen in a Caesar. But behind that smile, shadows lingered. His childhood had taught Caligula that power always walked with suspicion, and in the light of his coronation, perhaps he too heard a whisper in his heart, "All of this is only fleeting." It was said that only months after he took the throne, Caligula fell gravely ill, nearly dying. All Rome prayed, bringing offerings to the temples. When he recovered, the people rejoiced again, calling it a miracle of the gods. But in Caligula's mind, that moment carved a deep mark, the frailty of life and the thought that he had been spared by the gods for another purpose. From then, the radiant smile slowly turned into an unreadable gaze. The people still cheered, the senators still knelt, but in the young emperor's eyes, another spark had begun to glow, a fire no longer just of mercy, but mixed with ambition and delusion. Imagine, in the palace at night, Caligula sits alone, gazing out at Rome, glittering beneath the moon. The city sleeps, yet he stays awake, silent in thought. Memories of the golden cage in Capri return, the cruelties of Tiberius flickering like ghosts. And perhaps, deep within, Caligula whispers to himself, "Now, I am the one who holds it all. I will go further, do more." The Roman throne, so splendid in appearance, was a mirror, reflecting both light and shadow. And Caligula, the young emperor, the radiant smile, was about to walk a path few could have foreseen, for soon the banquet tables would be set, the music would rise, the wine would flow without end. But in the haze of incense and flickering candles, the games of Caligula would leave Rome astonished and afraid. There were nights when Rome did not sleep. The Palatine Palace shone bright as a false dawn, even when the sky outside was filled with stars. And there, amid echoing music, were feasts that seemed never to end. Imagine the massive bronze doors opening. From within spilled candlelight, mingling with the sweet, heavy scent of wine. On long, silk-covered tables, gold cups, silver goblets, jade dishes stood side by side, piled high with roasted meats, sea fish, fruits from across the empire. Rome itself, from Egypt, Gaul, to distant Britannia, was present at the feast, a miniature world upon the table. It was said that Caligula loved most the nights without an ending. He sat at the center of the table, draped in a purple robe, embroidered with gold, a laurel crown tilting on his curled hair. Around him crowded guests, senators, nobles, singers, dancers, and servants with anxious eyes. The harp rang, drums pulsed softly, voices sang in whispers, and within that harmony came the emperor's bursting laughter, a long laugh, ringing like a bell, making the table fall silent at once, before erupting again in clapping and raised cups. Caligula's feasts were not merely for food and drink. They were a stage for him to display power. He ordered nobles to rise and sing like entertainers. He made aged senators dance foolish steps to the roaring laughter of the hall. For Caligula, the humiliation of the mighty was the finest appetizer. Some nights, he ordered thousands of candles lit, turning the palace into a sea of shimmering light. Shadows on the walls became whole processions of phantoms, as if one had wandered into a dream. But within that dream, no one dared breathe too loudly, for a single frown from the emperor could turn laughter into a death sentence. Imagine yourself at that table. Before you lies a dish of fine fish, its aroma rich. Beside you, a cup of deep red wine, glowing like blood in the firelight. But you do not dare eat much, nor drink deeply, for at any moment, the emperor might decide to make you his jest, forcing you to perform before the crowd. And if you refuse, the blade of a guard's sword would chill your neck in an instant. Caligula loved turning every boundary into comedy. He crowned a servant with garlands, then made nobles kneel before him. He placed a slave upon a golden chair, then forced officials to stand at his side. Amid the raucous laughter were eyes glistening with tears, hidden behind masks of joy. Sometimes, the feast lasted until morning. At dawn, guests staggered out of the palace, their eyes blurred from wine, from fear, from exhaustion. But Caligula still sat there, wide-eyed, gazing at Rome beneath the rising sun, smiling as if the revelry had only just begun. Some said the feasts were proof of the empire's extreme luxury, but others whispered they were only a curtain, and behind it, stranger and crueler spectacles waited. Imagine, as the candles burned low, smoke drifted, and the palace sank back into darkness. Guests departed, leaving petals scattered on the stone floor, shattered goblets, and tangled footprints. In that space lingered the emperor's laughter, echoing like a man who never wished the revelry to end. But Rome could not live on feasts alone. The people began to whisper from where came the wealth to feed such endless nights. the treasury thinned, taxes rose, and the common folk felt the burden. Yet inside the palace, the revels continued, with no sign of ceasing, and from these feasts, stranger entertainments would be born. The jest would no longer stop at song and dance, but would reach for blood and for life. Those who once sat at the table, who once laughed in the light, would soon find themselves prey in the emperor's next game, for to Caligula, a feast was not just for joy. It was a reminder he could do anything, and all must clap in silence. There were laughs that echoed through the Palatine palace. At first it sounded like laughter from a feast, but the more one listened, the more it carried a bitter edge, like a hidden blade within the music. It was the laughter of Caligula. After endless banquets, the young emperor seemed to crave something more, an amusement not only to delight, but to make him feel his power was absolute. And so, the palace became more than a place to eat and drink. It turned into a strange stage where men became puppets. Imagine, in the blazing hall, while wine still poured freely, Caligula suddenly pointed to an aged senator. His voice rose, gentle yet cold. "Sing for me," like a street performer. The man trembled, but still had to rise, his hoarse voice breaking among the music. The crowd forced their applause, forced their laughter, and the emperor leaned back in his chair, eyes shining with pleasure. Another time, Caligula commanded a stern nobleman to dance a woman's dance. His rich robes tangled at his feet as he stumbled, while laughter filled the hall. Yet it was not the laughter of joy, but of fear. For all knew a laugh at the wrong time, or silence at the wrong moment, could end in death. In the candlelight, faces strained to hide their shame. But to Caligula, it was all entertainment. He savored the trembling of the mighty as a musician savors the notes of his own melody. It was said he once led horses into a feast, making guests toast them as if to gods. Another time, he draped a servant girl in purple, seated her on a golden throne, and ordered senators to bow before her as though to a queen. Laughter filled the room, but many eyes glistened with tears. These absurd games reflected a truth. Caligula wanted all to see that before him rank meant nothing. No dignity, no honor remained. Only the absolute power of one man expressed through mocking laughter. In this slow telling, we can imagine the palace as a theater. High vaulted ceilings, flickering light, dozens of faces seated at the long table. But instead of classic plays, they were forced to perform themselves in roles of humiliation. And the only true spectator was the emperor. There were moments when Caligula laughed so hard his body shook, his goblet spilling wine across the stone floor. Red streaks ran, like thin streams of blood. Many shuddered, but none dared wipe it away. None dared breathe too loud, for they knew, after laughter, might come the order for execution. For Caligula, a jest never stayed light. When bored of singing and dancing, he turned to fear as his new spice. A slave's small mistake could end in his blood spilled before the guests, as though part of the show. And while crimson spread across the floor, The emperor sipped his wine, smiling night after night. The games blurred the line between revelry and torment. All laughed, yet inside, fear rose like a wave. Perhaps, deep down, Caligula was not only seeking amusement, he was seeking proof that all must obey, that their laughter was not given freely, but forced by fear. To him, that was the true height of power, and so Rome witnessed an emperor who turned jests into weapons, laughter into invisible blades. But the games could not remain at mere humiliation. Soon, they would take another step. They would touch upon hidden secrets, upon taboos Rome itself dared not name. There were nights when laughter still rang through the Palatine Palace, but if one listened closely, behind that laughter was another sound, the echo of fear, of blood dripping onto cold stone. From forcing guests to sing and dance, Caligula quickly moved further. He had realized laughter alone was not enough. Fear was what endured. And from then on, the jest was joined by blood. One night, at a feast, in the glow of golden candles, Caligula pointed to a guard who had made a small mistake. He smiled, his voice soft as if telling a story. Show everyone the price of carelessness. The bodyguard drew his sword at once. A slash rang out. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. The hall fell silent. But the emperor sipped his wine, eyes gleaming with delight. Then he laughed. A long laugh, forcing the others to laugh with him. Their voices trembling, their laughter choking, like stifled sobs. At times, Caligula turned the arena itself into his private game. Instead of trained fighters, he chose random people from the crowd, a merchant, a farmer, even a noble. They were dragged into the sand, empty-handed, facing beasts or armed soldiers. The audience watched in horror, yet none dared look away, for whoever disobeyed could become the next victim. It was said, once, Caligula rose before the stands, cloaked in purple, and declared, "Today, I want more blood, for blood is beautiful under the sun." The shouts rose, but they were not of true joy. They were the cries of fear, trembling in the chests of tens of thousands. Inside the palace, the violence grew ever more sudden. Caligula could be laughing, then call for a servant, order guards to entertain the emperor, and so red blood stained the white marble floor again. The feast continued, as though it were only a change of song. Imagine yourself at such a table. The cup in your hand shakes. The scent of wine fills your nose. Before you, a body has fallen, blood soaking the cloth. Yet no one can speak. You must raise your cup, smile, clap, while your heart pounds fast. It is no longer a banquet, but a bloody play. Caligula sought not only to frighten others, he sought to test his own limits of cruelty. At times, he ordered executions to be carried out slowly, so he could watch every flicker of expression on the face of the dying. Some whispered, he even nodded, as though savoring a gentle melody. At moments, he turned to the guests, smiling sweetly. Do you see how beautiful death is? Any word could summon the blade. And so, Silence filled the room, broken only by harsh breaths, and the emperor's laughter echoing like a dreadful trumpet. Later historians would say Caligula used violence to prove he alone held the power of life and death. All of it was to show a single truth. In this vast empire, the life of any person was as fragile as a candle before the wind. One survivor of a feast once confessed, "We no longer knew where the feast ended, and the execution began." All blended together under the smile of Caesar. The image of the palace in those days was like a strange painting. Stone walls glittering with candlelight, banquet tables heavy with wine, soft music in the air. Yet among them, the stench of fresh blood, bodies collapsed, the ring of cold steel upon stone. A scene both beautiful and chilling, and outside, whispers spread. Rumors that inside the palace, the emperor feasted not only on wine and song, but on blood. They whispered in taverns, in crowded markets, "Perhaps Caesar has truly gone mad." But all knew, if such whispers reached the wrong ears, death would follow at once. Caligula, once the young emperor, adored by the people, had crossed into another realm. He no longer sought joy in music, but in screams. No longer drunk on wine, but on blood. And so, the splendor of Rome turned into a nightmare within its own palace. Yet, the bloody games were only the beginning, for deeper in the shadows lay secrets that even Romans trembled to name. Forbidden bonds, rumors of love that crossed every boundary, waiting to be revealed. Outside, Rome still glittered with music and fire from public feasts. But inside, behind closed doors, was a world ruled by Caligula alone. They whispered that when night fell, the emperor invited his sisters into a hidden chamber. Drusilla, the gentlest of them, was closest to him. Julia Livilla and Agrippina could not escape the same orbit. In a room draped in purple silk, candlelight flickering, Caligula did not treat them as sisters. He seated them beside his throne, laid his golden cloak over their shoulders, as though turning blood kin into queens. At times, before the court, he kissed them on the lips, a kiss too long for anyone to believe it was mere affection. The historian Suetonius wrote that he often forced his sisters to sit beside him at feasts, whispering words no one could hear, then bursting into laughter. At times, he pulled Drusilla onto his lap, as if to make a daring proclamation. The palace sank into silence. Guests lowered their heads, all knowing they were witnessing a boundary erased. Darker rumors claimed Caligula dragged them away from banquets into side chambers, leaving behind his shrill laughter and unsettling eyes. The doors closed, and only whispers and laughter spilled out, leaving imaginations to conjure horrors. Worse than truth, with Drusilla, the bond grew more troubling. He called her the wife of Caesar, allowed her to sit in council, something no woman had ever done. When she died, he mourned her like an empress, ordering her worshipped as a goddess. To the people, this was no longer sibling affection. This was love that defied all order. And Rome whispered, "Caesar has loved his own blood." Imagine in that chamber, silk curtains swaying, incense drifting, Caligula sat upon a golden chair, eyes burning. He crowned Drusilla with garlands, placed a diadem on Agrippina, stroked Julia Livilla's hair. Such gestures, at first like a brother's affection in that half-dream world, turned into a game of power, where the line between kin and lover dissolved, and such acts, a touch, a kiss, a smile, were enough to make Rome tremble. Some said he even used those moments to shame the nobles. He would invite them to banquets, then announce he had slept with their wives or daughters, sometimes dragging them out of the chamber in front of all. No one dared protest, for protest meant death. True or not, such words thickened the veil of legend around Caligula. Perhaps the truth was different. Perhaps much was the invention of historians who despised him. Yet rumor's shadow loomed larger than truth. So much so that even now, when his name is spoken, one recalls the secret chamber the whispers never confirmed. In this slow telling, the hidden room feels like an illusion. It appears hazy in incense smoke, in laughter, in whispers. And when we leave, only an uneasy trace remains, like a lingering scent upon one's clothes, never washed away. For from those secret chambers, Caligula's image ceased to be the radiant young emperor and became the shape of boundless corruption. And here, his legend took another step, leaving Rome in shock. There are tales that sound like myths, yet pass through generations until they became symbols, indelible. For Caligula, one such tale was of a horse named Incitatus. They said Caligula loved this horse as more than an animal. He cherished it as a dear companion, even as an honored guest of the palace. Its stable was lined with marble, its manger of silver, its water served in a crystal bowl. Each night, guards stood watch, so none would disturb its sleep. Imagine it, a horse, white coat gleaming like snow, draped in a purple blanket stitched with gold, hooves clicking softly on stone, eyes shining bright under torchlight. In Rome, where thousands of slaves were nameless dust, a horse lived as a prince. Caligula even brought Incitatus to feasts. He laid tables for it, with dishes of young grass mixed with honey, crushed walnuts in golden bowls. Guests raised their cups in toasts, as though honoring a noble guest. Some whispered the emperor made them kneel before the horse, reminding all that his power could raise anyone or anything to the level of Rome's elite. And the rumor spread Caligula planned to make Incitatus consul, the highest office of the old republic, now symbolic under the empire. Was it true, or a slander by hostile historians? None could say, but the image of a horse in purple robes seated upon the throne burned into the world's imagination. Seen gently, the tale seems like a bizarre play. Caligula mocking the Roman Senate. You are so useless. Even my horse could do your work. In his laughter was scorn. For a class once proud of its power, imagine senators in white togas stepping into the chamber. On the high platform, instead of a magistrate, a horse stood tethered, its mane combed smooth, a silver basin before it, Guards stood silent, and above them, Caligula laughed, eyes shining, while the senators bowed their heads, no one daring to speak. Perhaps it was not mere jest. Perhaps it was a declaration. All of this is a game in my hands. Even reason, law, tradition are but threads I may break. But if we think more softly, perhaps Incitatus was only Caligula's refuge. In a palace of plots and deceit, perhaps he found peace only in the horse's pure eyes. A creature loyal, incapable of betrayal, untouched by schemes, a silent companion, while the humans around him wove endless traps. Perhaps that was the loneliness of an emperor. And Incitatus, in this hazy light, became the very symbol of that solitude. Whatever the truth, the story was recorded. It made the world remember Caligula as the emperor who honored a horse as an equal to men, who turned just into politics, who made madness into an immortal tale. And when we close our eyes, we might imagine that horse quietly walking the marble halls, its hooves echoing like the heartbeat of a Rome both splendid and decaying. From the secrets of the hidden chamber to the horse in the palace, Caligula pushed Rome into a strange delirium where the line between fact and legend dissolved. And what awaited ahead would astonish even more. Rome, still the greatest city of the ancient world, its towering domes, its solemn temples, its bustling forum. But in the years of Caligula's reign, that air began to change. Beneath the golden sunlight, the city gleamed. But in the hearts of the people, a nightmare slowly stirred. By day, Rome was as lively as ever. The hammer rang from the forges. The cries of merchants filled the markets. The rumble of chariots shook the stone streets. Yet among these familiar sounds came new whispers. What did Caesar do last night? A wine seller told his customer the emperor had held a feast for 3 days straight, forcing guests to watch executions. An old woman on a street corner murmured, eyes darting, that Caesar had brought his horse into the Senate. A soldier returning from the palace swore he had seen Caesar call his sister empress. No one knew what was truth, what was false. But each day, the stories spread faster. They passed from street vendors to taverns to temple courtyards where beggars gathered. And Rome, once the city of pride, now trembled in rumor. At night, when moonlight lay over the Tiber, the city wore another face. Flickering torches before poor houses, broken songs from taverns afar. Yet within it, unease grew. None dared speak Caesar's name aloud. Instead, they whispered as if telling ghost stories. He has gone mad, and Rome will pay the price. Meanwhile, Caligula grew ever fonder of bizarre parades. He staged grand processions, guards in strange-colored cloaks, beasts pulling golden wagons, slaves scattering rose petals along the streets. The people watched from both sides, filled with wonder, curiosity, and fear. Once he ordered an entire ship, encrusted with jewels, to be set afloat on the Tiber, holding a banquet upon the water. Hundreds of torches reflected, making a vision like a dream. Yet behind that beauty, Rome knew the treasury was emptying, and taxes would soon fall again upon the people. Imagine, you are an ordinary Roman citizen. In the morning you hear, The emperor gave gold to a slave, simply because his song pleased him. By afternoon, you hear, he executed a noble because he clapped out of rhythm. These tales, mingled together, blurred into uncertainty, leaving you unsure what to believe. Rome was becoming a vast stage where all were unwilling actors in Caligula's play, and all knew the only audience to please was the emperor. The unease spread even to the Senate. Senators in white togas grew ever more silent. They attended meetings, but dared not debate. For a single word of opposition could erase an entire family. The Palatine Palace was no longer a place of governance, but of mockery and humiliation. In marble corridors, the footsteps of guards echoed steady, like drums of oppression. Outside, Rome still shone by day, but within, it trembled as in a nightmare. Many citizens believed the gods were punishing the city. Astrologers whispered of omens, a comet in the sky, an earthquake far away. All were tied to the name of Caligula. To them, he was no longer mortal, but the embodiment of chaos. Close your eyes and picture Rome in those days. The streets still crowded, the market still loud, but in every alley, eyes glanced about. Hands covered mouths, chilling stories passed in whispers. On the high hill, the Palatine Palace still blazed each night, like a flame, consuming the city's peace. Rome, the pride of the world, had become a strange dream, beautiful yet terrifying. A dream from which, when one awoke, none knew if they were living in reality or trapped in the jest of a tyrant. And from that nightmare, a thought began to stir in the shadows. If Rome wished to escape, someone would have to wake first. In the Palatine Palace, the corridors still blazed with candlelight, still echoed with music from endless feasts. Yet beneath the revelry, other whispers stirred, whispers of conspiracy. Caligula grew ever more unpredictable. One day he showered gold upon the people. The next, he raised heavy taxes. One morning, he proclaimed himself a living god. That very evening, he laughed and mocked the gods themselves. To him, everything was a game. But to those who lived under him, the game could no longer be endured. In the Senate, more and more senators bowed their heads lower. They laughed with the emperor. But inside, anger festered. Some had lost fortunes to feed his excess. Some had lost kin in sudden executions. All stayed silent. But within that silence, hatred smoldered. In the dark marble corridors, hurried footsteps echoed. Guards whispered to each other. One leaned close to his comrade, murmuring softly, "We cannot endure this forever." Such whispers were dust at first, but each speck gathered until a dark cloud hung over the palace. One of the most bitter was Cassius Chaerea, once an officer of the guard, loyal to Caesar. He had been turned into a joke, forced to speak in a woman's voice, mocked with shameful nicknames at the banquet table. That humiliation, day after day, grew into a blade hidden in his heart. Chaerea was not alone. Officials, too, had lost patience. Courtiers had watched the emperor kill for amusement. They realized If nothing was done, Rome would drown in delirium. Imagine one evening, the long corridor, flickering candlelight, the wind whispering through stone windows. A small group gathered in a shadowed corner. They exchanged glances, swore their oaths in whispers. None dared raise a voice, for even an echo might draw the guards. In those whispers, a plan took shape. They would not strike during a feast when the crowd was alert. They would choose a moment of surprise when the emperor least expected, when he felt most secure. In the days that followed, the palace still rang with Caligula's laughter, still gleamed with feasts. He never noticed that as he lifted his goblet, men behind him gripped their sword hilts, fingers trembling with restraint. As he laughed, cold eyes met in the shadows, silently rehearsing the plan. Beyond the palace, Rome too seethed. The people wearied of taxes, of rumors, of strange parades. The people's discontent was the canvas, the blades within the palace, the final stroke. Amid festival drums, amid the endless music, another melody whispered low, the melody of conspiracy. Close your eyes and picture it. You walk the long corridor of the palace, candles trembling in the breeze, cold stone walls, footsteps echoing. Somewhere, two guards exchange a glance. A senator draws his cloak tighter, hiding a scrap of paper with secret words. All seems as usual, yet beneath it, destiny waits to burst forth. Caligula, in wine and laughter, never noticed. He still believed himself untouchable. He was a god, the master of life and death. But in that very belief, the daggers in the dark sharpened sharper each day. Rome, eternal city, had seen tyrants before, dynasties soaked in blood. But this time, it was those closest to the emperor who would strike. And from the candlelit corridors, a shadow spread. The shadow of betrayal. The shadow of fate. There are days when history turns in an instant. For Caligula, that moment came one winter morning in the year 41 AD. Imagine the Palatine Palace that day, bathed in sunlight like any other. The sky clear, the breeze light across marble halls. In the courtyard, guards stood firm. Banners fluttered. All seemed calm. But beneath that calm, blades had been hidden. Eyes had met in silent pact. Caligula had just left a small theater within the palace. He walked among his retinue, his purple robe trailing in the breeze, his lips still curved in laughter. That laughter echoed, familiar, but this time many heard within it the sound of an ending. Cassius Chaerea, the officer once mocked in jest, walked behind. In his hand, the weight of a sword. For years he had swallowed humiliation, feigned obedience, and today that shame had hardened into resolve. The corridor behind the stage was narrow and dim. Candles flickered weakly. This was the place the conspirators had chosen, hidden, sudden. Caligula, unguarded, still joked with a few attendants. Then, destiny knocked. Chaerea stepped forward, his voice ringing in the tight hall. And now is the time. The sword swung. One stroke, then another. Steel met bone with a toll like a funeral bell. Caligula cried out, eyes wide in disbelief. He staggered, collapsed, never understanding what had befallen him. The conspirators rushed in. Blades, swords, all struck at once. In a brief instant, the young emperor, who once made Rome tremble, was now surrounded by his own guards. Shouts filled the air. Cloaks swept across the stone. The heavy breath of men, striking in fury. Caligula collapsed, blood spreading across the marble floor. The once radiant smile had turned into purple lips. His eyes, wide, as if still longing to laugh, but unable. On that stage, chaos spread swiftly. Servants screamed in terror. Guards ran forward, but none dared intervene. For the order of the plot was clear. Whoever resists will share his fate. Caligula's wife, Caesonia, was slain soon after. His little daughter, barely walking, was not spared. The plot aimed not only at the emperor, but at erasing his bloodline, as though Rome might free itself from the haunting shadow. In this slow telling, we see the marble corridor fall silent. Candles still burned, smoke still rose, but on the floor were wide stains of blood, and among them a young body lay fallen. Caligula, once lifted to the throne in cheers, now left the world to the cold steel of betrayal. The news spread swiftly. The palace shook. Outside, the people, hearing, were stunned and yet relieved. Some rejoiced, calling it the day Rome escaped its nightmare. Others were silent, remembering Caligula once as a light of hope, once as the son of Germanicus. His death was both release and an unspoken wound. In the Senate, senators hurried to meet. They argued who would be successor. Rome had rid itself of a tyrant, but now faced a dangerous void. In that chaos, another figure appeared. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, soon to be raised to the throne. But that is a tale for another chapter. Imagine that night. The Palatine Palace lay in silence. No music, no laughter, only the smell of dried blood mixed with incense. Only the wind hissing through the halls like unseen mourning. Above, Rome still shone beneath the moon, but within, a name had ended, Caligula. His death was not merely the fall of a man. It was the collapse of a legend, of a short yet haunting reign. It reminded Rome that even one who called himself divine could not escape the sword of men. And when we close our eyes, listening to this slow telling, we see the young emperor, once radiant in the sun, now only a fading memory, dissolving into night. Yet the story did not end, for after his death, Rome did not find peace. Instead, the city sank deeper into fear, into new plots. The death of Caligula was but the beginning of another chain of chaos. The end came swift as a storm, but its echo lingered long in Rome. Even before his blood dried on marble, the city trembled. People rushed home, whispering, "Caesar is dead." In many eyes, relief, as if waking from a nightmare. In others, Suspicion. If an emperor could be killed within his palace, who was safe? In the Senate, panic spread. Senators who had despised Caligula now trembled at the void. Some wished to restore the old republic. Others sought a new emperor, lest Rome fall to disorder. In those short days, Rome wandered, uncertain which path to follow. Then fate turned again. Claudius, Caligula's overlooked uncle, mocked for his stammer. Awkward frame, was found by guards, trembling behind a curtain in the palace. They lifted him up, proclaimed him emperor. And so, in a heartbeat, Rome had a new ruler. The death of Caligula did not bring freedom. It merely opened another chapter of empire. Rome had shed a tyrant, only to spin again in the wheel of throne, blood, and intrigue. Picture Rome in the days after his death. The streets alive, but not with celebration. With whispers, with murmurs. People argued, was Caligula truly mad? Or was he a victim of enemies' hatred? Some recalled the first bright months when he gave gold, held games, smiled among the people. Others shook their heads, remembering blood, cruel jests, the horse in the palace. Rome, as if gazing into a dim mirror, saw Caligula's image, both light and shadow, both man and monster. Later historians, like Suetonius or Dio Cassius, recorded the stories of Caligula with words heavy with outrage. But how much was truth? And how much invention? We cannot know for certain. What we do know is that his image has endured for 2,000 years as a symbol of power corrupted, a childhood in a golden cage, a short reign, a bloody death in the corridor. All of it within just 4 years, yet leaving a weight upon history. Caligula became a mirror for the world that followed. That absolute power in the hands of an unstable man could turn into a shared nightmare. In this slow telling, picture Rome at night. After it all, the oil lamps on the Palatine fading. Corridors, once filled with laughter, now silent, as though life had never been. Wind passing through the windows, carrying echoes. Perhaps the last trace of Caligula's laughter, or only marble, cracking under time. Above, the stars still shone. The city still lived. The Tiber still flowed. But in the memory of its people, a short reign had carved a deep scar of fear. And so Caligula became a legend. Not a legend of victories, but of madness. A reign, brief as a dream, yet lingering, like a long echo. One people wished to forget, yet could not. As we close the tale, we see history is not written only in glory. It is also written in pain, in memories. Mankind wished to hide. Caligula is proof of that. When a name has passed nearly 2,000 years, what remains? The truth of history or legend embroidered upon it. With Caligula, the line is blurrier than with any other. The tales we heard The endless feasts, the cruel jokes, the secrets with his sisters, the horse, incitatus, even the bloody end, all came through historians like Suetonius, Dio Cassius, Josephus. But those pens were not impartial witnesses. Suetonius, writing the 12 Caesars, described Caligula in words filled with disgust. He recorded every shocking detail, every tale meant to chill. Dio Cassius, centuries later, leaned on older sources, adding his own imagination. Josephus, the Jewish historian, saw him through the lens of faith, as one who insulted the gods. So, were we hearing truth, or the echo of prejudice? Perhaps, in part, Caligula truly was extravagant, truly cruel. He raised heavy taxes, executed officials, flaunted power with strange parades. These, all sources agree. But tales of incest, of making his horse consul, of laughing at blood, may have been exaggerations, symbols of corruption, painted dark to brand him a tyrant. Imagine as though history holds up a mirror in candlelight. In it, Caligula's face appears, but the flame flickers, shadows dance, and the image shifts, clear, then distorted. And we, centuries later, can only glimpse the shadow, never the full face. Some modern scholars suggest Caligula fell into madness after a grave illness in his first year as emperor. Perhaps he changed, became unstable, and small acts were magnified through hatred, turning into tales of horror. Others suggest he was simply a young politician, inexperienced, surrounded by enemies, and remembered as a monster by those who followed. So where is the truth? Perhaps it lies in the silence between the lines, in the gaps the chronicles never spoke. Let imagination carry us to a night in the palace. Caligula sits alone. No feast, no blood, only the window before him. Moonlight falling on red tiles, the Tiber glimmering below. In that pale light, he is only a young man, 25, 26, burdened by childhood fears, by losses endured, and by the weight of Rome's throne. Perhaps, in that moment, he was simply human, as fragile as any of us. But history did not record that moment. History recorded only the laughter, the blood, the cruel jest. And so, over time, Caligula's image became a distorted mirror. Some saw a mad tyrant, others, a young man blackened by history. Both images may be true. Both may be false. What is certain is this: the name Caligula became a symbol of power corrupted, of a reign brief, yet haunting. He was remembered not to be praised, but to warn. And perhaps that was his greatest legacy, to stand as a cautionary tale for all generations to come. Close your eyes and imagine Rome. Centuries later, visitors walk the Palatine halls, hearing guides tell the old tale. People smile, shiver, and move on. Yet in that space, still a whisper lingers. How much of it was truth? How much only legend? That question may never be answered. And from that question, we reach the end. For Caligula, whether tyrant or victim, truth or myth, still lives in human memory like a shadow that will not fade. When a reign ends, what remains is not only events, it is memory. And memory sometimes shines bright as the sun, sometimes darkens like shadow. With Caligula, the memory Rome kept was a darkness hard to erase. Centuries after his death, the name Caligula still echoed in tales told by lamplight. He was not recalled as a wise ruler, nor as a conqueror, but as a fleeting nightmare. A reign of 4 years, yet an echo lasting over 2,000. In history's pages, Caligula appeared as a tyrant. In collective memory, he stood as a symbol of madness. And in mankind's imagination, he became both real and unreal, both man and monster. Imagine yourself standing in the Roman Forum today, gazing at the surviving columns. Beneath the sun and wind, it is hard to picture that once these stones echoed with his laughter, saw his strange parades, trembled at his sudden decrees. But if you listen closely, perhaps, in the wind, you will hear an echo, laughter, at once bright and cold. Rome never forgot Caligula, for he became a mirror. When power knows no limits, it devours both the ruler and realm. His story is not for glory, but for warning. And that is why Caligula lives on in the shadow of memory. He is like a crack upon Rome's shining mirror, reminding us that not all of empire was greatness and triumph. At times, within glory, a fracture hides, and from that fracture, darkness seeps. Modern historians often ask, was Caligula truly mad, or only the victim of hostile pens? Yet perhaps the answer no longer matters, for what humanity remembers is not absolute truth, but the memory retold. And that memory, over centuries, has painted Caligula in darkness. Close your eyes and picture it, Rome by night, the Tiber drifting under moonlight, ancient bridges spanning the river, silent witnesses. On the Palatine Hill, the ruins still stand, broken walls, chipped columns, wind passing through the cracks, whispering like a voice. And within that whisper, perhaps you hear his name, Caligula. No golden tables, no gleaming banquets remain, only ruins and wind. But memory remains, haunting as a shadow that never lifts. Perhaps it was the very brevity of his reign that made Caligula immortal in memory. A fire burning bright, then extinguished, leaving smoke in the eyes. Long reigns may be forgotten, but strange, sudden flames are remembered. And Caligula, in 4 short years, turned Rome into a nightmare none could forget. In this slow telling, we realize the darkness in Rome's memory is not about one man alone. It is a reminder for all generations that history never shines with light alone. Behind victories, behind glory, lie stories of blood, of tears, of fear. Caligula became an inseparable part of that tapestry. And so, as we close this story, we are not only telling of a tyrant, we are telling of Rome itself, a mighty empire, yet fragile, vulnerable to the ambitions and desires of one man. The shadow in Rome's memory was the shadow of Caligula, and within that shadow we hear a gentle whisper: history never truly sleeps. It waits for us to listen, to remind us that light and darkness always walk together. And so, the tale of Caligula comes to its end. From a trembling childhood in a golden cage to the radiant throne, then the feasts, the jest, the blood, the desire, and finally, the death in a cold corridor. All of it within just 4 short years. Yet its echo endures. Caligula, in the eyes of many, was a tyrant. In Rome's memory, a nightmare. In history's pages, a legend of madness. But if we listen softly through the dust of time, perhaps we find another truth. He was also simply human. A young man, bearing fear, bearing longing, bearing shadows in his soul. And because he was human, he became a story mankind could never forget. As we close this journey, let your mind drift into rest. Imagine ancient Rome fading into mist. Palaces, laughter, blood, all dissolving. Only the Tiber, flowing quietly under the moon, only the night wind, carrying distant echoes. In this slow breath, we understand history is not only light, nor only shadow. It is a blend, a mirror of human nature. And in Caligula's darkness, we glimpse a reflection of light. The light of awareness. That power is never absolute. Now, let this story drift into a dream. Let your mind be calm, at ease. For history, like sleep, always holds both shadow and light, and always whispers gentle lessons to those who listen. Sleep well, with history for sleep.